English prose written in 16th century. The variety of purposes for which English prose writings were used during the 16th century contributed to the development of this genre. Translations of the Bible, dialogues presenting different religious stances, sermons, and religious laws were written in English prose for religious and instructive purposes. Besides, the prose was also used for teaching secular branches of knowledge, recording history, producing pamphlets or short books, and telling entertaining stories. The prose writers of the Tudor period, like their predecessors, continued to translate different prose works into English, but at the same time produced several original works. We can broadly divide the prose writings of the 16th century into the categories of religious prose, instructive prose, history and biography, and prose romance. Moreover, some miscellaneous prose works, including pamphlets and books dealing with various topics, are also discussed in the following pages. Next, we have religious prose. Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestantism, strongly advocated the idea that common people should be able to read the Bible in their own languages. With the popularity of Protestantism in England, the provision of the English translation of the Bible was strongly felt. Earlier, John Wycliffe in the 14th century had translated the Bible into English. In the 16th century, different religious scholars followed the footsteps of Wycliffe and translated the Bible into English. The most notable of these translators is William Tyndale, who translated the Greek and Hebrew versions of the Bible rather than its Latin translation called the Vulgate. His translations of the Bible was published in 1529 and became a useful resource for the later translators. In 1537, another English clergyman, Miles Coverdale, published his complete English translation of the Bible. Since Coverdale did not have command over Greek and Hebrew languages, he relied on Latin and Greek versions of the Bible. However, Coverdale's English translation was used by his contemporaries. In 1549, during the reign of Edward VI, the Book of Common Prayers, compiled by Archbishop Cranmer, was published and placed in all churches across England. It contained translations of different parts of the Bible, mostly taken from Coverdale's translation. In Elizabeth I's reign, the Book of Common Prayer was declared the official prayer book. William Tyndale, besides translating the Bible into English, also wrote religious pamphlets projecting his Protestant beliefs. Tyndale's Protestant views were strongly attacked by Sir Thomas More, a courtier of Henry VIII. Moreover, More was a very learned man and mostly known for his Latin prose work Utopia, in which he depicts life in an ideal world. Sir Thomas More was a staunch Catholic and in 1528 wrote a pamphlet titled A Dialogue Concerning Heresies and defended the position of the Catholic Church as the only true Christian religious institution. William Tyndale responded by producing an answer onto Sir Thomas More's dialogue. Consequently, Sir Thomas More replied with a lengthy treatise with the title A Confutation of Tyndale's Answer. It contained an imaginary dialogue between Thomas More and Tyndale. Another significant English work written by Thomas More is a Dialogue of Comfort Against Tribulation. He wrote this work while he was imprisoned in the Tower of London after losing the favor of Henry VIII, whom he opposed for breaking away from the Catholic Church. While waiting for his execution, More wrote an imaginary dialogue between two Hungarian gentlemen, Anthony and Vincent. More used the year 1528 and the country of Hungary as the setting for this dialogue. It was the time when Hungary was facing the invasions of the Ottoman Emperor Suleiman the Magnificent. The conversation between Anthony and Vincent takes place in the background of threat and fear of attack by Turks. This prose work is not purely religious, but it is the spiritual reflection of the author who discusses the temporariness of worldly power and pleasures and insists on the significance of repentance of sins, which he believes leads to comfort even in the times of tribulation. The imaginary characters, while exchanging dialogues, blend seriousness and humor and elaborate their ideas by telling anecdotes or short narratives. History and biographies. Sir Thomas More's life was recorded by his son-in-law Sir William Roper. In the biography titled The Life of Sir Thomas More, it was published in 1556 and is still considered an authentic record of More's life. Edward Hall, in his famous work titled Union of Two Noble and Illustrious Families of Lancaster and York, recorded the history of England from the reign of Henry IV to that of Henry VIII. This book is also known as Hall's Chronicle and was published in 1548, a year after Hall's death. John Fox produced a historical work titled Acts and Monuments. It is also known as the Book of Martyrs. The original Latin version of this book was published in 1559, but its English translation was available in 1563. It is an account of different Christian martyrs, mostly narrated by earlier historians. However, the most original part of this prose work includes information about the lives of the English Protestants who were executed during the reign of Mary the Catholic. This historical work serves as a record of the struggle of early English Protestants. The first printed history of the British Isles was produced by the 16th century historian called Raphael Holinshed. It is called the Chronicles of England, Scotland and Ireland, and is popularly known as Holinshed's Chronicle. This elaborate historical document was first published in 1577 and then an enlarged version in 2 volumes was published in 1587. Different historians contributed in writing this significant historical work, and they include William Harrison, Richard Stanyhurst, Edmund Campion, and John Hooker. Holinshed's chronicles owe their significance to the fact that they were used as a source of information by the contemporary playwrights who produced historical plays. Christopher Marlowe relied on the account mentioned in Holinshed's chronicles while writing his play Edward II. Similarly, Shakespeare in his play King Lear, कोई से बोलते हैं King Lear. It depends on person to person. Okay, so Shakespeare in his play King Lear used the story Holinshed told of an ancient British king who divided his kingdom among his children. Moreover, Shakespeare's play Macbeth is also based on the events occurring during the reign of the Scottish king Duncan, as stated in the chronicles. Next, we have instructive prose. The English prose writers during the 16th century produced different works intending to educate the common people on a variety of matters. For instance, in 1531, Sir Thomas Elyot wrote the Book of the Governor. This book was meant to guide the contemporary gentlemen who wanted to take up different positions as administrators of public matters. The contents of the book reflect the influence of the Renaissance on Eliot, who uses different several continental references in this work. He especially draws the ideas from the philosophy of contemporary Dutch scholar Desiderius Erasmus. Eliot in this work quotes different scholars and also tells different anecdotes. His prose style is characterized by its clarity. Roger Ascham was an expert in Greek language and taught Greek and Latin languages to Elizabeth I. अब देखें ये वर्ड जो है रॉजर एशम, क्या इस वर्ड से लगता है कि इसे एशम बोला जाएगा? नहीं लगता, बिकॉज इसके वर्ड और इसकी प्रोनाउंसिएशन में बहुत ही ज़्यादा डिफरेंस है, इसलिए एक बार देखना बहुत ही ज़्यादा ज़रूरी होता है हमें इसके वर्ड्स की प्रोनाउंसिएशन. He is, however, more known for his didactic writings in English. In 1545, Ascham's book titled Toxophilus or Lover of the Bow was published. It discusses the art of archery and presents the skill of using long bow and arrow as the national sport of England. This book is written in the form of dialogues and reflects Ascham's personal observations and paints a lively picture of life in England. Ascham also wrote The Schoolmaster, a book meant to guide the teachers of England language a book meant to guide the teachers of Latin language, and it was published in 1570. Thomas Wilson published his first book, The Rule of Reason, in 1551. He declared that this book contained the explanations of the art of logic in a vulgar tongue. Wilson, in fact, wrote a textbook in English language for the students of philosophy who needed this knowledge, often expressed in ancient languages. The contents of the book were a reproduction of Aristotle's view. His second book, The Art of Rhetoric, was published in 1553 and is considered the first handbook of English composition. In this book, Wilson advocates the need for writing simple prose in English and strongly opposes the practice of borrowing phrases from Latin and Greek languages. Then we have prose romances. The genre of romance was introduced in English during the Middle English period, and initially poets composed romances. However, Sir Thomas Malory's Death of Arthur was a prose romance written in English in 15th century. The trend of writing romances in English prose continued and flourished during the 16th century. These fictional accounts related in English prose later became the forerunners of English novel, which appeared in the 18th century. The most notable writers of romances in English prose of this period are Sir Philip Sidney, John Lilly, Thomas Nash, and Thomas Delany. Sir Philip Sidney was a significant literary artist of his age, besides being a soldier, courtier, and statesman. He produced poetry as well as prose in English. Sydney's prose romance Arcadia was written in 1570 and published in 1590. He tells a pastoral story about an ideal world where the characters are shepherds and farmers and live peacefully and happily. He adds to this pastoral tale some elements popular in his contemporary age, including attack of pirates, a separation and reunion of parents and children, and mistaken identities. The romance is divided into 5 books, like the 5 acts of a play. Arcadia is an imaginary country ruled by gentle and kind-hearted Bacillus. He has a wife and 2 daughters, Pamela and Philoclea. Bacillus, along with his family, retires and lives in the countryside. True princes, जो prince होते ना, two prince from another country arrive in Arcadia and fall in love with the 2 daughters of Bacillus. The young men disguise themselves in order to get access to the princesses. However, the two princes are accused of Bacillus' supposed murder. When things get worse, Eutychus, अच्छा यूर्चस, अच्छा ये इसका नाम यूर्चस है, यूर्चस या यूर्चस, ये देख लीजिएगा, ठीक है, यूर्चस या यूर्चस ही वैसे बना है यूर्चस. When things okay. When things get worse, Eutychus, the father of one of the prince, intervenes and resolves all problems. Thus, harmony and happiness in Bacillus' household and his kingdom are restored. Sidney revised the first version of Arcadia and made the story more complex by adding the character of a wicked female relative, Cecropia, thus making Arcadia a moral and didactic work. John Lilly was one of the university wits and studied at Oxford University. He wrote 2 prose romances, namely Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, and its sequel or second part titled Euphues and His England. The first book was published in 1578, while the other followed in 1579. Lilly picked the name Euphues for his protagonist from Roger Ascham's book, The Schoolmaster. Lilly's Euphues is a Greek nobleman. In the first book, titled Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, the protagonist Euphues visits the Italian city of Naples in order to meet his friend Philatus. In Naples, Euphues falls in love with his friend's fiancée, Lucilla, but she betrays him and gets interested in another man. In the second book, titled Euphues and His England, the protagonist is reunited with his friend Philotas and both travel through England. This time, however, Philotas falls in love and Euphues, as a detached observer who has learned from his previous bitter experiences, watches his friend. These prose works written by Lilly lack well-knitted plots. Their content mostly consists of conversations and letters exchanged between the characters about the topic of love. Despite these drawbacks, these works are significant for 2 reasons. Firstly, in these prose works, Lilly introduced a new style of using English prose called Euphuism. Euphuism. Sorry, इसे Euphuism बोलेंगे ना. First Uh-huh. Firstly, fir- firstly, in these prose works, Lily introduces a new style of using English prose called euphuism, and its significant characteristics include using phrases of same length, repetition of verbs in successive sentences, and employment of similar sounding words. Secondly, these works reflect a severe criticism of contemporary society and its moral values. Lily uses Naples as a setting for the action in which first work and refers to the superficial practices of its residents. In his second work, he depicts England and highlights the social evils, thus moralizing by means of these fictional accounts of Euphues' adventures. Thomas Nash was a famous pamphleteer of the 16th century. He wrote a prose romance, The Life of Jack Wilton, or The Unfortunate Traveller. It was published in 1594. This crude Picarac's tale relates several episodes in the life of its central character John Wilton. The action occurs in the reign of Henry VIII, and Jack Wilton travels across different countries of Europe, beginning with England. He visits Germany, Holland, and Italy and witnesses many significant historical events and meets significant people like the Earl of Surrey and Erasmus. Another significant English prose written of 16th century is Thomas Delaney. He was trained as a weaver, and his prose works depict the lives of contemporary artisans. In 1590, Delaney wrote three tales in prose, including Jack of Newbury. अच्छा ये आज ना ये जो अमेरिकन प्रोनाउंसिएशन है इसमें न्यू बैरी बोलते हैं कुछ तो दूसरे में न्यूबरी है. It depends. The Gentle Craft and Thomas of Reading. The first of these works, titled Jack of Newbury, tells the story of a weaver who works hard and becomes a clothier, thus implying several people. Similarly, Thomas of Reading is also a clothier. The Gentle Craft depicts the lives of shoemakers. Delaney's prose writings are quite realistic. His dialogues and vivid details, written in simple and unadorned style, reflect the social life of his contemporary age. Miscellaneous prose works. Pamphlets or short books were a popular form of writing in Britain during the 16th century and dealt with various topics including politics, religion, literature, education, and even personal experiences. Some of these pamphlets have literary importance. For instance, Thomas Nash in 1594 produced a semi-autobiographical pamphlet titled Piers Penniless and his supplications to the devil. In this pamphlet, Piers is an unsuccessful writer and complains against his misfortunes. Similarly, Robert Greene wrote a pamphlet with a title Groatsworth of wit bought with a million repentance. It tells the story of three characters, including a true brother Roberto, a playwright, and Lucanio, a businessman, and a courtesan, Lamelia. It is an autobiographical work in which characters exchange dialogues, tell anecdotes, and sing songs. John Cheeke was a professor of Greek language. He taught in the Cambridge University and also served as a tutor of the Greek language to Edward VI and Elizabeth I. The Heart of Sedition was the title of a political pamphlet Chequet wrote in 1549 in order to defend the reformative steps taken by the government of Edward VI. Stephen Gosson in 1579 produced a pamphlet, The School of Abuse, containing a pleasant invective against poets, pipers, players, jesters, and such like caterpillars of a commonwealth. Gosson, in this pamphlet, criticized the contemporary literature and theatre and claimed that they produce immoral effects. This pamphlet provoked Sir Philip Sidney to write a book to defend and justify the significance of literature. Sidney's book, titled On the Defense of Poetry or An Apology of Our Poetry, was published in 1580. It is a significant work of literary criticism in English. Writing in simple English prose, Sidney synthesizes different arguments in favor of poetry through his idea. Though his ideas are not original, yet his fluency of style is certainly impressive. In this book, he enlists various types of poetry and analyzes it. He admits that the poetry written in his contemporary age is quite substandard. Spenser and Shakespeare's works were not published during Sidney's lifetime. He, however, argues that poetry imitates the ideal and not the real, and thus motivates the audience to achieve the ideal. Another significant book written in English prose is Thomas Nash's The Terrors of Night. It was published in 1594. The writer in this book analyzes the reasons which make people dream, have nightmares, and see ghosts or apparitions.